The rise and fall of Mark the Guinea Pig Desmond. Even though Mark Desmond's death may have brought an end to the final chapter of his life, the consequences of his acts continued to reverberate across Ireland's criminal underworld for a considerable amount of time after his body was discovered in Griffin Valley Park, where it was riddled with gunshots. In the days that followed his murder, the streets were filled with whispered talks and rumors that circulated across the neighborhood. His assassination was a cause for quiet relief for some people, because it marked the end of a reign of terror that had caused widespread anxiety in the lives of countless people. Others interpreted it as a sign of a potentially hazardous change in power, a void that rival gangs were eager to fill with their own power. As soon as the killing occurred, the Gardaí acted swiftly and initiated a comprehensive inquiry into the matter. However, just like with the numerous atrocities that Desmond was accused of arranging, it would be difficult to discover those guilty for the crimes. The lack of communication that surrounded his murder was deafening. In a world where vengeance is the norm, it was difficult to find witnesses, and those who might have known something chose to keep their mouths shut. They were well aware of the consequences that would result from speaking up in such world. There was never a single person who was found guilty of Desmond's murder, despite the fact that arrests were made and names were whispered, most notably the involvement of those connected to the Kavanaugh gang. Despite his passing, justice continued to elude him, just as it had done so frequently throughout his life. In the months that followed Desmond's murder, it became increasingly apparent how extensive the criminal influence that he had exerted had been. Beyond the realm of drug selling and armed robbery, his operations had expanded significantly. In addition to engaging in activities like as extortion, intimidation, and the trafficking of weapons, Desmond had established a network that was involved in money laundering schemes that reached into the United Kingdom and mainland Europe. His image was strengthened not only as a street-level enforcer, but also as an international crime figure, as a result of the fact that associates in Spain, the Netherlands, and Eastern Europe had collaborated with him to transfer narcotics and filthy money. As a result of the investigations that were conducted by the police after his death, concealed caches of firearms and documents that detailed drug routes and money activities were discovered. In the weeks following Desmond's death, raids were conducted on a number of safe houses that were associated with his gang. More than €250,000 in cash, encrypted burner phones, and a ledger containing names that related to corrupt officials in both the legal and illicit realms were discovered by the Gardaí authorities in a flat located in Dublin. Suspicions circulated that some of the individuals with whom Desmond had conducted business included politicians, former law enforcement personnel, and international cartel liaisons. These suspicions threw a lengthy and unsettling shadow over the institutions that were intended to uphold justice. With the passage of time, a greater number of Desmond's previous associates began to fall. Some of them were arrested while others were killed by gunfire. The gang networks that he had formerly headed continued to fall apart as a result of the same betrayals and power battles that had already determined his fate. There was a shift in the power dynamic as younger players with greater ambition emerged from the general disarray. As they extensively examined Desmond's rise to power and subsequent fall from it, they gained insight not only from his ruthless strategies, but also from the blunders that eventually left him vulnerable. It was quite evident that there was no one to trust, and that you should never permit yourself to become overly powerful or overly isolated. Desmond's name started to take on an aspect that was almost mythical in certain circles, despite the fact that his actions were quite violent. An outlaw whose narrative was heard and replayed in pubs, alleys, and prison cells, he became a cautionary tale in Dublin's harshest areas. His story was relayed from one person to another. For some people, he was a representation of unbridled aggression and the desire to commit crimes. His life was regarded through a distorted prism of adulation by some people, particularly the younger generation that was caught up in the world of gangs and poverty. In spite of the fact that he was threatened with imprisonment or death, he was seen as a guy who had triumphed over the system, established an empire, and refused to submit to authority. Nevertheless, the price of that legacy was quite high. These were the true traces that Desmond left behind: families who were torn apart, lives that were lost, and entire communities that lived in fear. The murders of Darren Carey and Patrick Murray, which occurred in the year 2000 and were considered to be the beginning of Desmond's downward spiral into violence, remained unsolved all these years. Despite the fact that the majority of people felt Desmond was responsible for the killings, no one was ever found guilty, and the families of the victims were left without any answers. As was the case with a great number of other people who were impacted by Desmond's criminal acts, they were compelled to bear their sorrow in silence, with the sole knowledge that justice had never adequately been carried out. The cycle of violence that Desmond had helped to maintain did not come to an end when he passed away. It was, if anything, a more intense event. Across the entirety of Dublin, turf warfare broke out as rival gangs fought for control of what was left of his severely shattered empire. Gardaí found themselves stretched thin as they sought to contain a wave of violence that appeared to have no obvious center anymore. As the number of shootings increased, they found themselves in a difficult position. The void that Desmond's death had left behind had resulted in pandemonium, a hydra of criminal activity with multiple heads, each of which was more desperate and reckless than the one before it. By the late 2000s and 10s, the Irish government has begun to take more serious measures to tackle organized crime. This was in part prompted by the legacy of criminals like as Desmond. The special anti-gang task forces were bolstered, new monitoring technologies were deployed, and stiffer sanctions were enacted for drug and gun violations. All of these events took place simultaneously. Unfortunately, despite all of their efforts, the seeds that Desmond had planted over the years continued to produce fruit that was toxic. The path that Mark Desmond's life would take was both frightening and weirdly inevitable, according to those who followed the story closely. His climb had been rapid and merciless, beginning with him working as a young enforcer in Ballyfermot and culminating in him becoming one of the most dreaded names in Ireland's criminal landscape. It is rare for power that is founded on violence and fear to endure. At the end of the day, Desmond was brought down by the exact things that had once made him so formidable: betrayal, mistrust, and an unquenchable thirst for supremacy. His killing in a peaceful park in Dublin on a winter night was not only the end of a man, but it was also the end of an era. It was an era that was characterized by unbridled brutality, corrupt loyalties, and a terrifying reminder of how far a person can fall when they compromise their morality for power. Nevertheless, his tale continues to be told, not just in the documents of the courts and the articles that were published in the press, but also in the hearts of those who knew him, feared him, and were irrevocably altered by the path of destruction that he left behind. Would you like it? Hit the like button and subscribe to our channels for more interesting and informative videos.